Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Lucio Gomiero, the Chief Executive Officer of Promoturismo Friuli Venezia Giulia, and I realized that the only place where we can stay without mask is this stage. So I asked to be here, so this is the reason why I am the coordinator of this important session. Thank you very much to Professor Fantoni, to Mr. Della Vedova to invite me. And to be honest, it's really a pleasure, really honor to have with us Professor Jeffrey Sachs, that is going to spend 45 minutes with us of intensity, of high-profile discussion. I think it takes a long time to present Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Can I say that he is the director of the Center for Sustainability Development at Columbia University? He has lots of consulting services to many governments. He is director of the Agency of United States for Sustainability, and so on. And it's a long track, and I feel not in the right position to properly present him. But I am sure that I can say something about him with the most energy that I can. He is a friend of Trieste, he is a friend of Friuli Venezia Giulia. And this is the most relevant aspects also of today. He is part of the steering committee of important project that we have in the tourism, in the culture, and in the sustainability of the region, to create a path, a touristic path of 17 arts for sustainability, where 17 artists will prepare a masterpiece, each for one of the 70 global goals of sustainability. So this is a short introduction, but thank you very much, Jeff, to be with us also on behalf of Professor Fantoni, who is with us in the stage. And just before leaving the stage to you, I want just to summarize the topics. It's a very actual topic where Jeff is going to drive us. It's the link between politics and science, or science and politics. Is something that we need even more. This link is still to strengthen, is still to enhance, is still to innovate in order to take better and faster decisions in each field. And Jeff is going to discuss about the pandemic situation, just talk about science and the politics, and at the end is going to also to talk about science and politics about sustainability. So this is the menu. We are a region very interested in sustainability. We are a region in which we have also to face the pandemic, and I think that we can learn from Jeff at the global level, but also about our local level of management of the different situations. Jeff, thanks a lot.
Lucio, thank you very much. It's really a great pleasure to be with you, although it would be an even greater pleasure to be in person in Trieste, which was, of course, the plan when we first discussed the Euroscience Open Forum 2020, and I was thrilled to be invited. I also don't have a face mask on, but that's because I am, of course, isolated in my home, as we have been for many months. I'm in New York City, one of the very hard-hit areas of the pandemic, but one where, fortunately, the pandemic has eased very considerably and now we have some hope for at least a partial return to our lives. Trieste and this science forum has been a great meeting place over the years for the social responsibility of science. And there have been very important declarations that have come out of Trieste on science and responsibility, science and human rights, science and sustainable development in the world. And so I want to thank the great institutions of Trieste and of Friuli, Venezia Giulia, more generally, for your leadership. You live in one of the most beautiful places, but you share it with the whole world, the spirit of sustainability. After all, you're a region that has been settled for thousands of years, so there's a lot of sustainability, but also a tremendous civic spirit, and that is a global contribution. This pandemic is, of course, deeply unsettling and unnerving for many, many reasons. And I picked three pillars that I want to discuss very briefly: the science, the politics, and the sustainability as they relate to COVID-19. On the science, I believe that science once again has acquitted itself very well and very importantly in this period and in this epidemic, and at least in two ways. First, scientists warned us repeatedly about the risks of pandemics because we have been living in an age of emerging zoonotic diseases. That is, diseases that emerge from interactions with animal populations that are carrying pathogens. And COVID-19 is only one of many zoonotic transmissions. SARS, of course, we know, Nipah, Zika, Middle East respiratory syndrome, H1N1 of 2009-2010, another pandemic, are all examples of emerging diseases and zoonotic events where the pathogen passed from animal to human populations. When we look back, the scientists not only were warning us about pandemics, they were telling us specifically about horseshoe bat pandemics because we had the experience of SARS. So the idea that there would be a zoonotic event transmitting a pathogen from a bat population to human population was known and warned upon. And one can find explicit scientific studies showing the number of interactions between bats and humans, especially in southwestern China, year by year, detected, for example, by testing populations in Yunnan province for antibodies against coronaviruses. And lo and behold, this is not something new or something surprising. We were not ready for it, but the scientists were warning us about it. The second point about science is how global and rapidly it has mobilized in the response to the pandemic. There are literally tens of thousands of scientific articles that have been written since the start of the year. Indeed, from the time that the virus was first seen clinically in Wuhan around Christmas time 2019, it was just 2 weeks until the virus was identified, sequenced genomically, and put online on January 12th for scientists all over the world. You know, the United States government has charged China with delays and fabrications. I think that this is mostly a lie, because within just a short period of time, in a high confusion of a new disease, we already knew the pathogen and we knew the genomic sequence. That's a remarkable tribute to open global science. And it was posted in time for Germany and Korea as two leaders to go to work on making test equipment immediately based on this international information. The failure of the United States to do so is a failure of politics. It is not a failure of China, nor is it a failure of science. Since then, science has contributed to an understanding of the epidemiology of the virus, how it spreads, how it can be suppressed through what we call non-pharmaceutical interventions, or in English, NPIs, like wearing face masks, physical distancing, testing and tracing, quarantining, stopping large events, and so on. So there's been a tremendous surge of knowledge about what to do. Scientists have enabled us to compare the best practices, and the best practices have tended to be in the Asia-Pacific region, in China itself, in suppressing the epidemic, in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Cambodia, Australia, New Zealand. These are all countries that did much better than Italy or France or Spain or Germany or the United States in suppressing the epidemic, and the scientists have given us the tools to understand the differences across the countries. Each of us looks probably several times a day at the global numbers that are collected in real time of cases, deaths, tests, and so forth. And this is, again, a scientific achievement of cross-border cooperation to make systematic information available. And finally, I would say, regarding science, the science is advancing vaccine candidates at an unprecedented rate. We have 200 vaccine candidates at some stage of clinical trials right now. We could have the fastest introduction of a vaccine in history because of the intensive work that is underway. This, again, is a marvel of scientific accomplishment. But if we turn to the second of my three themes, politics, we have, of course, a profound worry. And the profound worry is that our politicians are not only not scientifically trained, many of them are abusive to science or directly anti-science. I live in a country with a president who is a pathological liar daily, and he is routinely anti-scientific to a shocking extent. And while some people may once upon a time have laughed at these foibles, so-called, the fact of the matter is the United States has now suffered 185,000 deaths on Trump's account because of the complete incapacity and lack of interest of Trump in applying scientific principles. Why is this? It is the end of a long story, though a terrible and tragic, devastating end of a long story. The United States has become more and more corrupt politically, and therefore more and more unwilling to listen to truth at the political level. because our politics stopped searching for truth. Instead, it searched for power and for money. This is a long process. In 1994, already 26 years ago, one of our most terrible politicians, Newt Gingrich, destroyed the Office of Technology Assessment of the US Congress that was providing scientific information to the Congress. The problem was that the information that was being provided was inconvenient for the politicians, who would rather lie to promote their allies and their cronies rather than find the truth and act upon the truth. That Office of Technology Assessment had shown, for example, that some weapon systems that the Pentagon was developing would not work. But the weapon systems were big money, billions of dollars, and Congress didn't want to hear about it. The scientists were showing that climate change was real and very dangerous. And the congressmen who represent big oil, big coal, and big gas did not want to hear about it. And the more money came into American politics, the more corrupt it became, and the less science played its role. And Trump is the end of a long story. Certainly the worst and most dangerous president we've ever had in American history. Certainly the most anti-scientific. And to every day we continue to have abuse of power. For example, demands that the Food and Drug Administration in our country approve untested solutions, which they have done because Trump has appointed non-scientists to key positions of scientific responsibility. Well, of course, I don't have to say to you that this is not only Trump. Italy has characters like this. Other countries have characters like this who have been brazen in not listening to evidence, even though our survival depends on listening to evidence. And we have the likes of Bolsonaro in Brazil and Duterte in the Philippines and other populist leaders who are demagogic, anti-science, and putting all of our lives at risk. So the paradox for us is that science has once again proved its worth and actually not weakened by huge disagreements among the scientific community. The truth of the matter is that while one can find individual voices or contrary voices on one issue or another, there is an enormous consensus among public health professionals and virologists about how to proceed on COVID-19, just as there is an overwhelming consensus about how to proceed on climate change. But our democracies have shown a great weakness, and that is the ability time and again for demagogues to seize power on the basis of untruths, on the basis of what is convenient. And it turns out that this, of course, is extremely dangerous. I'm not telling you anything new. The great Latin satirist and poet Juvenal in the Satires, of course, said 2,000 years ago, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, who is to guard the guardians? We don't have anyone guarding Trump right now, except we hope, and we have to hope, that the American people will come to understand the danger of this man with what will be more than 200,000 deaths on his watch by the time we come to the November election. That brings me to the third pillar, sustainability. Sustainable development is our most important concept for surviving and thriving in the future. The paradox of our age is precisely that we have better science and better technology than ever before in history. We have scientific advances at a rate per day or week that used to be measured in years or decades or centuries. It's astounding if we are truthful and honest, and if we apply science to public policy, how many problems can be solved. Most importantly for us this moment, we could stop the pandemic. About 2 billion people today live in countries where the virus has been effectively suppressed, other than a few cases here and there. And I've mentioned them. These are the Asia-Pacific countries. So we know that this can be done. And it certainly is not the lack of means or wealth or science in Italy or in the United States or in Brazil that prevents these kinds of measures from being taken, nor is it even a lack of resources that prevents them being taken in impoverished countries if we're smart enough to help those countries stop their epidemics, because stopping the epidemic everywhere is necessary for our safety. So sustainable development is the principle that we are all in this together, that everybody in the world should be able to meet economic needs, that every part of society should be included in a fair way, and that we should manage our affairs to confront the 4 environmental crises that are so urgent and interconnected. These are the crises of human-made climate change, the loss of biodiversity, the mega pollution, for example, of the Mediterranean Sea with plastics or the oceans, and the emerging diseases which come from unsustainable land use and from humans impinging on animal populations, causing the transfer of new diseases. So we face 4 interconnected environmental crises, and we must listen now to science in order to use our knowledge and our wealth to restructure the world economy for our well-being. We have 2 guiding global principles for that. The first are the Sustainable Development Goals, and Lucio mentioned the wonderful initiative of bringing the spirit of these goals to the world through art masterpieces in Art for the Global Goals project of Alessandro Gaetano and of course, Friuli Venezia Giulia. It's a wonderful initiative. And we're going to all come visit in person without face masks soon, because this virus is going to be under control. So this is the first of the pillars, the SDGs. The second is the Paris Climate Agreement, which calls on us now to decarbonize our energy systems, shift to solar power and wind power and other clean energy sources, and move to a circular economy with sustainable land use, sustainable agriculture, such as Andrea Illy is so brilliantly promoting and lives and exemplifies with the Illy Coffee leadership, and that can make a phenomenal difference in the quality of our lives. So if we use this occasion to understand this crisis, that science can help us solve these problems, that demagogues lead us in the wrong direction, that we need a politics that is based on justice and knowledge, and that the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement can be our North Star to guide us to solutions, I believe that we will get very, very far. I'm encouraged, by the way, that Europe, after a very hard winter and spring, and Italy being so hard hit by the pandemic, is now gathering its forces as a European-wide initiative for a recovery based on sustainable development principles. Europe's Green Deal and its Emergency Recovery Fund are now putting a couple $2 trillion behind a European-wide venture. And I know that in the great tradition of Trieste, you'll play a huge role in this, because Trieste's long been a meeting point in Europe and a critical juncture for Europe that brings together nations and brings together Europe, of course, with the Mediterranean itself and the Mediterranean region. So I think that Europe's commitment, European-wide initiative, is a huge inspiration. We're going to work very hard in the United States to elect Joe Biden so that we get out of our national nightmare. And I am confident that with a Biden presidency, you'll have a partner that will also implement a Green New Deal in the United States, and that will help us to make a world of open cooperation with China, with other countries of Asia, with Africa, with the rest of the Americas. We're in a very difficult crisis, but we can find the way out. Knowledge can help us to find the way out. And the beauty and the ethics of Trieste and Friuli, Venezia Giulia will help us to do the same. So thank you so much for letting me share a few thoughts with this year's Euroscience Open Forum, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much. If I may, just because your speech was full of insight, full of brilliant worldwide overview of the situation. Thank you very much, because we are richer now as people, as community. If I may, I have 3 questions for each, very quick question for each of your keywords. The first is the combination of science and politics. How much we still have the problem of a lack of communication? Do you think that there is a, let me say, there is a gap of a common language in which helps the scientists to explain the politics and vice versa, which is the reciprocal needs? I know that is probably a general comment, but probably we need to have this common understanding. Otherwise, politics and science stay on each side, and the population fall in the middle. Do you need something like as a baseline of the common language?
You know, part of the Sustainable Development Goals, actually target 4.7, says that everybody should have an education in sustainable development. That means actually in the classroom, everybody should learn about the environmental threats right now, so that we do have a common language. I think if you go back to the great philosophers, the ancient philosophers, Aristotle and Plato, they thought from the start that the only way to have good politics was an educated populace. And so Plato's Republic and Aristotle's The Politics emphasized the role of education as creating a base. This is without question. Second, of course, we need methods of good communication. But I think the big problem actually is governance. How do we have the fruitful interchange between science and policy? When scientists are under the control of government, they can be abused by politicians like Trump, obviously. And what makes science so strong is that it is basically self-governing through reputation, through verification, through institutions like our universities work by university faculties and so forth. It's not perfect, but it is not by electoral politics that science progresses. So we need to find an institutional manner that the Academy of Sciences can communicate with the politicians in an understandable way, but in a way also that the politicians cannot wreck the science or subvert the science. The scientists won't run policy, but the politicians should not be allowed to evade the scientific truths.
Thanks. The second question is about the, let me say, the Sustainability Development Report that was published in June, if I well remember. And there is a ranking of for all the countries. So they are listed more than 200 countries. And I was really surprised, we were really surprised to see that there are very few countries with the green grade. There is the green, the yellow, the orange, and the red. Green means okay. Each of the 17 goals was judged by the organization, by the Cambridge University, but there are very few countries with the green points for some of the 17 goals. I can list that Sweden has 4 green points, Denmark 2, Finland 5, France 1, Italy 0, USA 0. So how far are we to reach the commitment of the 17 global goals at the end of this decade?
Well, thanks. You know, first of all, of course, COVID is an ongoing extreme crisis, which is a major hazard for a large part of the world. People are going hungry right now. People are destitute right now. It's much more serious than we would know from the news stories, because we can be sure that the news stories are lagging the actual events by many months. The Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome put out a very striking report on food insecurity a couple of months ago that showed how high food insecurity was even before COVID. But we can be sure that this pandemic is causing a massive rise of insecurity. So, of course, the goals are farther away, and they would require a tremendous multilateral global effort to get on track. It's not impossible. I'm certainly not giving up. It will not happen with Trump as president, because the whole philosophy of America first is completely against the idea of the world together. We don't need America first, we need the world together. And so for that, we need a vision of shared common fate. And this, I think, has been all along the single biggest obstacle. But let me say, you know, in summary, we must stop the pandemic first. Then we need plans like the European Green Deal all over the world to say, now we're going to build back better. And we need to empower the global institutions like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank and the regional banks like the European Investment Bank to mobilize a lot more capital on behalf of developing countries especially, so that they can invest heavily in schools, in healthcare, in roads, in renewable energy, and so on. It would take a massive rebuilding effort, but it's absolutely feasible. It's the kind of effort we should take. And the fact that Europe, in the middle of the crisis, came together which has not been easy in recent years, for a recovery plan, in my view, is not only great for Europe, but also great for the world. Finally, in terms of climate change, we're just at the end of the story, meaning that temperatures are already 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than in the pre-industrial level. And we know that 1.5 degrees Celsius is a dangerous threshold that we're trying to not exceed. That's what the Paris Climate Agreement calls for. But unless we dramatically accelerate decarbonization of energy now, we won't do it. And the only way to have success is cooperation with China, India, Europe, and the United States, because these are the main powerhouses of fossil fuel use. And that means that we can't have a Cold War with China. We need cooperation with China right now, precisely on the global goal of maintaining a safe climate. So we're at the very edge of this story, and I'm sorry to say it. That's why, it's terrible that my own country would have such an important effect on this, but we need new leadership in the U.S. so that we can really make the global cooperation that we need.
Yep. I'm trying to read a question from the participants, Jeff. It's about how we can counteract misinformation. Our science is good, but is not always getting received well or enough by the media and the public. How we can react, because science seems to be, let me say, less on the media than the politics. How we can solve that? This is the question from the public.
It's a terribly difficult one to answer, because the misinformation is by design, not by accident. So the reason we hear misinformation is not that individuals have strange ideas, but that interest groups have aggressive ideas and are putting them out aggressively. In the English-speaking world, we have a particular phenomenon, for example. That is Rupert Murdoch. Because in Australia, the UK, and the US, Murdoch's media is especially destructive. Fox News, which is the television station that champions Donald Trump, is the main source of misinformation day by day, very well financed by a multi-billionaire, and very much watched by a lot of people. So this is mainstream media, if I could say it that way, that is the major source. Then, of course, we have a phenomenon that we have not come to grips with, which is the way that our online social media in Facebook and Twitter and so forth is a fountain of irresponsibility and venom. And I don't understand it adequately, but there's, again, to an important extent, organized campaigns on these media. The U.S. Government found in investigation that Russia played a significant role in some of that, but that's only one of many sources of systematic misinformation. And we have not solved this problem. One way that I'm trying to promote solutions in a small way, admittedly, is for the science academies and the universities to speak with more clarity and with the unity, because one of the methods of misinformation is to say to the public, you know, the scientists don't even agree with each other. And then they get somebody, usually on a payroll, to make a contrary statement. But the scientists overwhelmingly agree with each other. on major themes. And we need to help the public to understand this, that when the politicians go against the overwhelming scientific consensus, the public should know about it and should understand that this is a threat coming from these politicians. So we need that kind of defense mechanism in the public. But it's a very daunting challenge, and we certainly haven't solved it yet.
Okay. Is there any question from? No. I can raise probably the last one. I am curious about how this pandemic and the management of this pandemic is affecting the globalization. We know that 5 years ago, the number of people living in cities overcome the number of people living in the suburbs and in a rural area. And it was a trend since 20, 30 years ago, also before in Europe, of course, but in India and China was definitely the step up, and we overcome very quickly. And we have some boats, for example, here in the harbor of Trieste, and for the boat cruise, they are getting bigger and bigger, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people crowded together to do something and to go around. So now the people are still at home, they are just going to work just 2 days per week and so on. So the goods are still traveling, but the people are more or less in their location. So is the situation going to affect significantly the way of the globalization that we need for sure, but probably the model was not the right one? Is pandemic going to affect this issue, this topic?
I think it's a great puzzle, and there are a couple of aspects to the question. One is how will it affect the international relations, and second, how will it affect our cities? Let me say a word about our cities first, because there have been many forecasts in recent weeks saying that the cities can't survive this way because people can work from anywhere now. They don't want to be in crowded areas and so on. In New York, where we have a very densely populated city, and where the office buildings are empty right now, the future of New York, for example, is being much debated. But my own view is that our cities will thrive and survive and prosper. First of all, this epidemic will end. Maybe next year, maybe the year after, maybe the year after, but it will end, like all of these epidemics do. We will get vaccines, therapies, better treatments, more acquired immunity, and we will go back to a life without the daily threat of infection. So this is one thing that we should keep in mind. And of course, we've had many epidemics and pandemics in the past that caused crises. When Boccaccio wrote, people had retreated from the cities in the plague, but they returned to the cities. We know in retrospect that the Black Death, bubonic plague in 1347 in Italy, actually became, ironically, a forerunner of the Renaissance itself, which emerged soon afterwards. And it strikes me that the idea of the eternal Rome was an idea that was first expressed in the 1st century BC. So it's 2,000 years ago that Rome was first called the Eternal City, and it has lasted and thrived for 2,000 more years. So I'm quite optimistic about the cities, and especially about Italy's cities. You've been at this for 2,500 years. They are my favorite places in the world, inclusive, and I'm quite confident we'll get over this. I feel the same way about globalization as well. Right now, we're not traveling. This is certainly the longest stretch for me, not in an airport, in my adult life, over 40 years. I am eager to get back to Italy and to other places. And I think that we will return. And just to say, the way we're interconnecting now, I just was on a workshop with parliamentarians from around 100 countries. We're now more global even, but we're global through Zoom and through online, and we will see each other. If I could just say in closing, I know that we're at the end of the hour. I just want to thank again Trieste for its leadership, and note, which I meant to note at the beginning, that it was your great scientist, Rita Levi-Montalcini, who put the Trieste Declaration to the world about scientific responsibility. So what we're doing is really building on that great legacy.
Thanks a lot. Unfortunately, the time is over, but I have a very last question, very quick answer, because I hope to raise the question that nobody raised to you. Which is your favorite among the 17 goals? And then we close.
Well, you know, with all the children, you don't want to pick favorites, but the truth is right now I do pick SDG 4, which is education. Because like we discussed, the more we're educated, the safer and freer we will be. And so I put a lot of emphasis on education and sustainable development as the most essential way forward.
Yeah, thanks a lot, because I know for a father, you are one of the father of the 17 goals, it's difficult to choose one of the kids. I fully agree with you. I add, just to close your incredible and full of insight speech, that probably also the 17 goals, the partnership, is something that we need much more for the future.
Of course.
And probably, choose yours first and 17 for the second. Thank you very much, Jeff. And it was really a pleasure. And thanks also to all the attendees, all the people who stay with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much.